Welcome to the next episode of the CAPB podcast. For this session today, we are delighted to have current serving Army reservist, Toby Townsend, the founder of Buzz Drones. Welcome, Toby.
Thank you very much. Yeah, cheers for having me.
It's good to have you on, mate, and it's brilliant. Just a big shout out, and we'll get this in early. Big shout out to people in the Army Reserve, mate. Big shout out.
Yeah, I massively appreciate it, do you know what I mean? Because, like, for me personally, I think there is that imposter syndrome that kicks.
Welcome back. So minor technical glitch with obviously business never stops, mate. I get that. So as we were saying, it is an honour, mate, to have you on, and also big shout out to the Army Reserve, mate. You were mentioning about imposter syndrome, and so.
Yeah, I think it is because, like you say, I think that stigma around the reserves, for many, many years at all levels can, sort of tarnish that view upon reserves that, again, it's probably going to fire some people off when I say toy soldiers. But, like, my attitude is, like, I've joined for a reason, same cut of the cloth, and, in my eyes, it's that case that, I put my uniform on and I should be able to drop into any environment and nobody tell the difference. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, okay, there are some minor deficiencies in training simply because we don't have the time scale to have that same amount of training. But equally, that's where the onus is on us as individuals to make sure that we don't look like a melted marshmallow in a sack of shit when we turn up in kit. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, all the promotion
100%.
courses I've done are in line with our regular counterparts. So it's like, when I do stand there as a staff sergeant, it's like I've got the same backing behind me as my counterparts and peers. Do you know what I mean? So,
mate, the reality is, from my opinion, and I, having served 23 years, including working in the reserves, for me, it's all about credibility, mate. And as long as you are credible in your role, it does not matter whether you're regular reserve. One is not better than the other. And for me, serving in the Army Medical Services, we cannot function as a service without reserves. And for me, I had a whole new respect towards Army Reserve.
Yeah.
I started working for them because it's like people would turn up on drill nights and stuff, having worked a full day. Do you know what I mean? They would turn up on training weekends where they've worked all week, fuck their family off for another weekend when they do the commitment training. So, mate, if you are credible as an operator in your field, mate, it matters not with your regular reserve, mate. So,
which means a lot. I mean, just on that briefly, like, we had it with my NCO cadre when I was in the infantry. It was King's Division training team that absolutely spanked us for a weekend. It was like a pre-NCO cadre. And, they just made our life hell for the weekend. Do you know what I mean? Just because they could. And they said on the Sunday, they were like, lads, in fairness, you've given up your weekend, you finish work on the Friday, and we hate reserves. And that's why we treated you the way we did. And the fact that you're still standing at the end of the weekend and still here and you're going back into work tomorrow, hats off. And you were like, cheers, dickhead, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now wash your kit and go back to work Monday. Mate, you've served for 16 years. If your career was like a whistle-stop tour, highlight reel, movie trailer, what are the good parts? What does it look like, mate?
I think the unique bit, like, say, having yourself work with the reserves is like the opportunities that I've had to go overseas and, work across the UK as well. I've been fortunate that I've been part of a STTT for 6 weeks. I was the only reservist over there for 6 weeks in Malawi. And I had quite a crucial role delivering training to the Malawi Defence Force. I've been to Cyprus, France, Italy, America on an exchange, Canada, Kenya. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've had my fair share of, like, going around the place and doing stuff. And there is probably a little bit of that, dangle the carrot for retention and everything else like that. But, on all of these opportunities, I was working alongside the regulars. And then, like I say, like UK wise, like, we do like the Army Navy. I mean, I forget about that all the time. I'm like every year, I'm like, yeah, go Army Navy. Forget. But Edinburgh Tattoo, the Commonwealth Games, the Olympics. Do you know what I mean? Working at these high profile events, it's been absolutely great. But then equally, the guys and girls that I've met along the way, it's that network for life and friends for life. Prime example, like I said before, I've got my mate who sat upstairs that, I met, believe it or not, on a cadet course back in 2007, 2008. Fast forward to now, we're still mates. And it also turns out we know a lot of different people. So I think that's like a massive highlight. And then, not to sound too cliche, but the life skills that you get that, that's instilled in you, but you can transfer that across to, like having my own company. Those standards are pushed into the business. And then when I start working with people who are from the military background, you're all on the same song sheet anyway.
Love that, mate. Love that.
So yeah, that's what I'd say is like, the sort of highlight.
So you talk about your business
Yeah.
briefly then. So for people that don't know, what is Buzz Drones?
Good question. I don't know myself. No, I'm joking. So,
Right, end the
um,
podcast.
so it all started as like a hobby, really. So my first car was a Jeep Wrangler, and I was into off-roading. It had like big tires on it and all that, and I had GoPros on it. And I thought, oh, well, I ended up on a YouTube journey. I was researching something and discovered drones by the end of it. And I mentioned it to my dad, and he put the idea to bed. I put the idea to bed, and he rang me up a few months later. He was like, "Toby, guess what?" And I'm like, "What?" Because I bought 2 drones, and I'm like, "Oh, for fuck's sake," sort of thing. But without being biased to my dad, because obviously family, but he's had his own company for 30, 40 years, very successfully as well. And he's like, "Look, I've done the market research. Let's get you qualified and established before the market gets saturated." That was December 15. April 16, I was qualified as self-employed. And over the years, it's grown arms, legs, had children, and everything else like that. So we do everything from the sales and training of drones all the way through to like the service provision, like consulting, security work. I've just done 6 months of a night task, basically playing hide and seek for adults. Surveys to create 3D digital models, promotional content, weddings, roof inspections. You name it, it's such a broad brush. And, as I sort of touched on with that network that I've built up, the people that I can then pull in with their own little specialities. It's like Jason, who's from Four Lanks, where I met him. He's about 20 minutes down the road, and he does all this like technical surveying side of stuff. So if I get a request in, come like, Toby, I need a digital model, I'll just ping it off to him. And do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's a very broad brush of like, like I say, if you buy a drone, we'll take you through absolutely everything. And then we can actually fly the drones ourselves for stuff.
I think it's brilliant, mate. And I think the fact that you got into drones in 2015,
Yeah.
as to where they are now. And again, we spoke just before we started recording that Paul and I are toying with the idea of getting some drones to make some content to support our running and stuff. But I think drones are no longer a toy. I don't think you can see that drones are no longer a toy and a fad. They're turned into a military capability, and we've seen so much of it recently with Iran, but also with like the Ukraine, and it's been really well documented and YouTube videoed of how they've used these really cheap, and effective bits of kit to have real impact. And I think that's crazy. My son serves with the Royal Welsh.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of the courses he did last year was he did his drone course for recce.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know what I mean? I think it's crazy. It's that how big it's going.
Oh, massive. And I mean, just on that, like, it's it's a funny one for me because when I first got to my, when I transferred CAP badges, I was like in the drone space at that point. I was like, look, we need to employ drones on the battlefield for route recce's, and all this kind of stuff. And they looked at me as like a lance shark because, again, it kind of goes back to what we said. And, Matt, you appreciate it from working with the reserves that a lot of people just see the rank for what it is, not the person behind it, which is quite relevant in the reserve space. And they just looked at me as like a sproggy little lance shark being like, mate, you're chatting shit, just what you're on about. And then, exactly like you said there, fast forward to when Ukraine kicked off and they were like, Tobe, you fly drones, don't you? And I'm like, I was beating this drum 10 years ago and you chinned me off. Do you know what I mean? And like you say, because of, Ukraine, Gaza, Iran, everything that's happening, like I say, the drones have absolutely accelerated and people have woken up going, yeah, it's quite a credible asset.
I think it's mad as well, and steering away from the military place into the business space, like you mentioned earlier on about like surveys. Like, if you had a dodgy roof on your house, you'd need to get someone in maybe with scaffolding and ladders and shit.
Yeah.
Cherry picker, and now you can do it all from drone. And also like Amazon messing about with delivery services and all kind. I think it's like, yeah, it's a mad space to be in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing from our side as like operators is that we're not fighting against the CAA, but it feels like sometimes they don't necessarily have a clue how they're going to regulate it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like, oh, well, you need 30 meters that take off a landing. And you're like, where am I going to find 30 meters to, reasonably take off from? Do you know what I mean? And all this kind of stuff. And then with the new legislation they're bringing in, it's just constantly keeping up to date and changing with it. Because, like you say, not only have we got manned aviation in the sky, you're now introducing lunatics like me launching drones up, but then equally, like any industry, you're going to get the cowboys who just disregard everything, which ultimately then comes full circle back to us as the licensed operators that have those laws restricting us, which then makes it harder. And so it's just, until that balance is found. But
You mentioned something there, mate, about licensing. Is that a recent thing? It was on new. It was not no. So it was on the news. I think it was a couple of months ago that now, like, you can't just go and pick up a drone and just put it in the air. You have to have like a formal sort of license or registration or something like that. Is that the thing?
yeah, so there's different layers to it, if you will. So if you guys would like, say, go and buy a drone to go do your ultra hill running stuff, all you need to do is like your operator ID and your flyer ID. So your operator ID is like £11.79 a year off the CA's website, and you do your flyer ID, which is a series of 40 multiple guest questions. You get them done. That's it. You're cleared to go like hobby flying, essentially. But you in the old rule set, it's broken down into three main categories in the old rule set, where you've got your open, specific, and certified categories. So if you did that operator and flyer ID, that drops you into the open category, which is then split into three subcategories. So if you were to buy like a Mini 4, for example, and this is where people were getting wrapped around the axle when the Mini 5 came out, it was like 253 grams, 252 grams, which puts it over that 250 gram threshold to basically have free reign of where you're flying and stuff. But if you got a sub 250 gram drone, you just pay your £11.79 a year, and you're pretty much good to go wherever. But if you're going to start operating the commercial space, you need to go away for a week, or do it online with, like myself or other drone schools out there. And we literally go through like 9 or 10 PowerPoints from like the weather, navigation charts, air law, general like rules and all that kind of stuff. And it's like a week-long course where we take you through absolutely everything.
I think it's twofold, isn't it? Because like some of the drones you're talking about, I imagine they're quite expensive. And like, if you were to go out and spend 800-900 quid on a drone, I don't even know what relative expensive is. I imagine a lot more. I think you'd be ridiculous to not do a course, because if you don't and it ditches somewhere because you don't know what you're doing, that's thousands of pounds.
Easily.
You know what I mean?
Like say, like even the Mini 4s, Mini 5s, for example, like say the lower end of the scale, they're just shy of £1,000, 979 quid, I think it is. And like I say, some of the systems that I fly stuff from that through to £250,000, £500,000 systems that are fixed wing that disappear off 40k. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, when you're working at that end of the scale, there's like a lot more that you need to go through. But like I say, that breadth of aircraft that you can fly and stuff is, like I say, it's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers.
Love it.
The amount of stuff that can be done now with drones. We talked a little bit on military, but let's say like fast forward 20 years, right? Drones, you can envisage being almost like a part of day-to-day society in things like, because we've seen it, like you mentioned a minute ago about Amazon, and then we know there's parts that do medical supplies, like medical drops and things like that, and Deliveroo. But how else? I mean, this is an open-ended question to you, mate. But how do you see the technology? Did you see it? Okay, this is probably going to piss people off. I don't fucking care. But do you see it? Do you see it like a boom, like AI is currently, right? Or do you see it as a like rather it's not a flash in the pan, it's going to be a continued use of the technology throughout society? Deep question, but it's just wondering, because we have a lot of drones and you see it all the time now on social media. It's like I can see it if businesses are using it now and industries are using it now. Have you seen it in your sphere that it's growing bigger and bigger and bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what you've said, like both parts are correct. So when I first started, I had to do it was the course was permissions for aerial work. So no matter how you were benefiting from that drone job, be it somebody buys you a pint and a packet of crisps, like you still had to have this license. But then so back then it was like if you were serious about commercially operating, you had to invest, 1,500 quid for the week, plus your annual renewal at like 400 quid a year, plus insurance and everything else like that, etc. on top. Which then made it an elitist sort of career, if that makes sense. The old rule set came in where, like I touched on with the operator ID and flyer ID, where you can go spend no more than 1,200 quid and start banging out roof inspections at 50 quid. So that's where that massive hype came in. And, if I'm going to be brutally honest, the world according to Toby, the CA shot the industry in the foot, which then has caused this massive spike in everybody buying drones. But equally parallel to that, there is going to be the money's in a couple of avenues, be it, are you doing that real technical surveying where you're able to get 0.01 centimeter accuracy of a building so you can see the moss growing in the pointing and all that kind of stuff, lidar, thermal, that kind of jazz, or like you say, the big high-end systems where you're doing med delivery, Deliveroo, whatever else, you know what I mean? But equally, to get into that space, you need to have a very, very deep pocket. So I don't think it's a hype at the moment. I'd say the drone world's still in its infancy stage, but technology has expanded. It's just the legislation and the rule set that needs to marry up to that. But drones will definitely, start to be in the everyday life. The Met Police, they're installing something like 26 drone docks across London. So basically, that's replicating. It's either LA or San Francisco, one of the two, where they've got these docks strategically placed around the city. So when that 911 call comes in, the drone deploys, goes to the site, gets eyes on the event that's happening, whilst the patrol car's coming forward. Same detail in London. They're getting that Overwatch element in, and then
I think it's brilliant, mate. And I think that early messaging is something incredible. And I think we'll get on something else in a second. But I think with regards to what you mentioned about technology, Paul, and what you were talking about, I think technology is exponentially improving. So you can get batteries that last longer. You can get better quality cameras that are smaller. So do you know what I mean? It's like you're making, like you said about people, small investment getting into the industry. I think it's fascinating. Question about your career as a drone pilot. What's like one of the coolest things you've been asked to be involved with flying drones that you're allowed to talk about?
There's some stuff that I can't talk about because, like I say, it links into the military background and stuff. So obviously on a wider platform. But I've got a few for different reasons. I think one was when I was deployed with the army. I created a promo video for the training that we did for that 6 weeks, and we went out on safari, and I cleared it with the gamekeepers on safari, and they were like, "Yeah, as long as you don't obviously like piss the wildlife off, you can fly your drone around." And I was like, "This is mint." And there's a shot that I got of a baby elephant, and it looks up at the drone. And I know it sounds really weird, but it's such a majestic moment that this baby elephant is looking at this drone, and I had that like little 10-second connection with it, which I thought was like I say, really quite majestic. And again, that sort of goes back to the reserve service. Like I wouldn't choose to go on holiday to Malawi, for example, but with work, I've gone there and had a bit of like respite. What else? I think I don't know. Trying to think, because again, some of my mates said like, "Oh, I wish I had your job," and I'm like, "Yeah, but I just see it as normal work, if that makes sense."
I saw one of your things on your social media, and it had like, I think you must have been at a dock, and there was a huge, big shipping container. The vast, for me, it's like what the drone gives us, and I've used drone very small, and I'll tell you where. What it gives me as a layman, not involved in even like in shipping and doctor, was the sheer perspective of size. That's one thing. Drone thing. I use drones. I did my UEFA B license football coaching, and this was about 10 years ago, maybe about 8 years ago. And there was a lad on camp who had a drone, and I asked him to record just a match and training sessions, and he basically had this drone hovered above. And it stayed there. I think it had like a 30-minute battery, whatever, but it gave me like 30 minutes of positioning of the team, a different perspective. So for coaching, I could then go, great, we need to move this here.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it does massively. Like, people think, the way I look at it, people think that having a drone is getting a camera high and far away. It's not. It's exactly what you said. It's putting a camera where you can't put a person. And like say that dockyard, to be fair, that was one of the bucket list sort of jobs that I wanted to do. And then a guy from down south was like, "Oh, Toby, I've got a job at Peel Ports. Like, do you want to come and do a promo video of the ship coming in?" I was like, absolutely. And like you say, running around the dock and having a bit of free flight time to capture, like say, the containers just sat waiting to get loaded and stuff was pretty epic. I think another one just on it briefly. Was an absolute roller coaster of emotion. Was a friend of mine, Stu Logan, who ran unmanned air veterans. He was artillery, and he rang me up a couple of years ago. It's a bit of a sad story. One of his muckers went missing on the 11th of November, and he rang me up and was just like, "Toby, look, do you want to come and help out?" And I was like, "I don't know why you're even asking me. Just give me the grid reference. I'll be there." And so we went up to Dalswinton, just across the Scottish border, looking for Dane. And this was in January that we went up. So, bit shit. 2.5 days later, we found him. But what I'm saying is it's an absolute roller coaster of emotion. Is the fact that the amount of people that turned out was unbelievable, and we got closure for the family. But equally, the sadness of the result was horrendous. I can't lie. When it was closed, I got FaceTime to my parents and I broke down crying. Do you know what I mean? Just because that emotion and the tension relief and everything else like that. But again, using the drones in that field to for a really good purpose. It's great creating all these pretty pictures and everything else like that. But from I wouldn't necessarily say it's a highlight at all.
No, I think it's brilliant, mate. I don't think
a prominent feature. Do you know what I mean of the work?
I think it's incredible, and what a good use of a capability for mountain rescue and stuff. I'm sure they're using it because we live in North Wales. Paul lives in Snowdon National Park, and I think there's people dying all the time, mate. Even in you'd think mountain exposure, and even in the UK, but having that ability to, like you just said, and I think you expertly put it actually, is to put eyes where you can't put a person, and I think. That's so good. And as I say, what an opportunity to be involved in something quite poignant, absolute travesty. And there's a whole other, we could speak forever about.
Absolutely.
I mean, but absolutely, what a brilliant use of an amazing capability, mate. That's class, mate.
Like I say, just the sheer scale of the ground you can cover compared to the dogs or people on foot. When that security job, easily I was able to give people half an hour notice that some of our travelling buddies were inbound, type of thing. Do you know what I mean? I'm just up there with the controller shit. While some blokes on stag like
that. So Buzz Drones is coming up to its 10th year, or have you surpassed that yet?
Surpassed it, yeah. Literally 10 days ago, yeah.
So happy birthday, well done.
Thank you.
Out of that decade, right, you could, and I've got to really shorten this down, right? What is the biggest singular lesson that you have learned starting the business? So there's a couple of points here: starting the business and working within this industry.
Ooh, okay. Biggest lesson. I think confidence is one of them. Believe in yourself on multiple fronts. You don't know your limits until you push them. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like I say, if you rewind 10 years, I'd go to someone saying oh, would you like a roof inspection? I think it'll be really good type thing. Whereas now I'd be like, look, get the drone up, da 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 da. Like, do you know what I mean? So my attitude on it is massive. So I think that's the biggest thing I take away is confidence and believe in yourself. A little trivial point: it's called Buzz Drones because when I was 9 years old, a teacher looked at me and went, "You look like Buzz Lightyear."
I mean, they're right.
Yeah, it's probably a massive chin. Do you know what I mean?
Oh
But,
God!
so my childhood nickname is Buzz. So I thought with it being personal to me and it's my business, call it Buzz Drones. And sorry, what was the second part, Paul? Sorry, mate.
biggest lesson learned in industry, working in a what is arguably a fairly new industry back then to now.
Adaptability.
Adaptability.
Things are constantly changing. And again, like I say, it's having that flexibility as well, because like, you know, one of my closest mates, he's like, why is your industry never like fucking forward planning? And I'm like, well, we've got the weather to contend with, airspace, client budget, etc., etc., etc. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's been, and obviously the legislation changes more times than I care to remember. So I think that's the two things: confidence and adaptability. Really,
Brilliant.
is the two key points.
Really love that, mate. I think I was just thinking back to your when you mentioned about airspace there. When you were in Malawi, how that must have been an absolute joy, because I don't imagine the airspace in the
What
like,
airspace?
exactly. I imagine just having complete free reign to throw it about, whereas in the UK, I imagine it's like really not only like you've got to be careful of flight paths and all the rest of it. Just I'm sure there's like loads of governance and that, but that must have been quite nice to be. You know what I mean? To have like a safety cap off type thing,
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you look back to January this year, I was in Thailand teaching the Thai army how to fly a fixed wing system. And like I say, normally it's like, oh, well, we need to put a NOTAM in, which is a notice to airmen, for them to, this is our ops box, essentially. This is what we want to do.
Yeah.
Deconflict with the airspace, air traffic. But where we were working, I had a bloke on the radio direct into air traffic, and he's like, where do you want to go? I was like, 10 miles that way, please. And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
And then, like, literally, like I say, same detail. It was just a case of, sweet. So the drone will then just disappear 10 miles away at 2 kilometers up, and we're just sat in an orbit above some random location and then bring it back.
I
And
think it's class, mate.
What's next?
What's next? There's a few pokes in the fire. It's just that waiting game. Sort of like I touched on then. Do you know what I mean? People are like, yeah, we want this now. And then you're like, okay, we're ready. And then you hear nothing. So there's looking at expansion through the business, where I could be employing in the Northwest alone 20 lads to go out and do security at night time. So going from a one-man band to having 20 lads on the books will be like herding cats. There's looking at a drone hub that we're looking at. It's not been confirmed, and I don't want to be jinxing it, but in deep discussions about that, about having a centre of excellence in the Northwest, so we can run all sorts of courses and stuff, and that's all the way from like the STEM cadets environment all the way through both sides of the wire, essentially, for military and civic. And then it's just, I'm in a massive stage of reading my website, trying to get the socials, bouncing around, networking with people.
Doing amazing podcasts and all that kind of stuff,
Podcasts, absolutely, yeah. So that's without trying to give too much away, that's the kind of like next steps that we're working on at the moment, to try and take it to that next level.
I think that's one of the things that's quite difficult, and I get it, because I guess a lot of your work, a lot of your time at the moment is about like pitching an offer and almost like presenting like, this is how much it will cost you for this. Gold Standard will get you this, and like you said, it's like it's an increasingly competitive market.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things where you've got to show your wares, stay credible, stay in that space. Mate, we are coming towards the end of the recording of the podcast. You've got an incredible business that stood the test of time. It's been going for 10 years. That's obviously including going through a pandemic, and is still going strong and growing. What's the one bit of advice you would give to someone in the military community who was looking at starting a business?
You don't know unless you try. And I get it. Like, you know, I was in an employed role before I went self-employed, and having that safety net taken away, shit's scary. Do you know what I mean? But you know, it's like my dad's like, you know, my dad is, you know, my absolute rock when it comes to the business. You know, he's like my best friend, and he's like, you don't get any life lessons for being self-employed. You know, it takes a certain type of person to execute it. You know, people say to me, "Oh, I'd love to be able to self-employed, like work when you want." I was like, "What? 24 hours a day? Yeah, it's gleaming." Do you know what I mean? But so I think having, you know, you don't know until you try. And you know, you guys have seen it through your military careers as well. You know, how many blokes have gone, "Oh, I was thinking about going on selection," but they never did.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? For example, but the beauty as well, if someone's in the regular space, they've got that salary where they can build a business in the background. And then when they do decide to do the 7 clicks, they've got that client base, etc., already up and running. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say is like, you know what I mean? Just give it a go. You don't know what's going to happen.
Love that, mate. I love that. In fact, I've got one more question. Is there someone in the military community who you would love to collaborate with as Buzz Drones, mate?
I don't think there's a single person, if I'm going to be brutally honest. Do you know what I mean? Because like I say, all the people that I, you know, met along the way, yet to meet as well, everybody's got their own like avenue. Do you know what I mean? And there's a select few of us in the drone world that have the same attitude where it's like, you know, you get a lot of people where it's like, no, this is my train set. Leave it alone. Do you know what I mean? Whereas there's that much work, and if you join forces, like there's 2 lads that I used to work with, they're both now self-employed. We've joined forces to start delivering packages forward as that joint capability, and again, equally, you know, punch that across to the military community. So I know it's probably a bit of a gash answer, but there's no individual person I want to work with. You know, for example, like John at We Burns It, for example, you know, if things happen down the line with like the security task, I'll be going to him and be like, John, I need like 20, 40, 60 Yeti bugs, laser engraved, make it happen, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? And again, it's sort of that. I know we said not looking at the imposter syndrome, but there is an element of that. You know, like Tegs, for example, absolute nut job. Like, do you know what I mean? Bears at Combat Fuel. You know, the stuff that we can work with together. Teagues, Combat Clipper, brilliant lad. Been on the Smash with him a few times. So you know, again, it's just that networking that I love, and hence there's no direct focal at someone. It's I want to literally get to know everybody and, you know, build that brand for everybody moving forward.
Mate, I love that. I love that. Listen, mate, Toby, thank you so much for taking time to the podcast. Can't wait to share your story, mate. And yeah, thank you so much, buddy.
No, cheers for having us, and yeah, we'll speak to you soon.
Take care, mate.